recording.
So we'd like to call to order our curriculum meeting for today, and everyone is in attendance, except for Mark is not here. And we don't have any public comments, and we need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
So I ended it
All
myself.
all in favor? Aye. Okay, so the first thing on the agenda is information regarding forward results by target group. And I know that Timothy put together some information for us, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And just before we get actually into the presentation and click through the information, which we are going to add to board book subsequently, so you can
Okay.
see it later as a PDF. This is, something that has been a topic we've discussed. Is this related to our student achievement goal for this year and our focus on making sure our kids are where they need to be coming out of the pandemic and generally. And so before we get into this, I just kind of want to, revisit a few things just so we all have this in mind. One, student achievement and academic excellence is one of our district goals, one of the board goals for this year. 2 years ago, we added additional staffing for academic support. We typically call these positions interventionists. And that was an investment that was made 2 years ago. And then this year, and again, you approved so many things, but I just want to highlight this as part of that federal ESSER funding. We use that as an opportunity to make additional investments in more of what we would call the tier one. So when we think about students achieving success and we look at what we can do as schools, we think about what can we do in what we call the tier one, because we love vocabulary, we love acronyms. So tier one is what every kid gets in the classroom. And then we talk about tier two supports, and those are the additional interventions for kids that need something extra to stretch them or something extra to support them. So one thing that we did through the ESSER money with the intention of bringing it on our Fund 10 budget for the long term is we increased our budget for textbooks and instructional resources. One thing that allowed us to do was to extend our 5-8 math grades 5 through 8 math resources, and at the same time purchase a completely new set. Actually, we had 2 resources we purchased that relate to foundational literacy skills for kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade. So foundations, phonics, different things you'd hear out there. So we made what we feel was a pretty large investment in what all kids get, the tier one for kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade in the early literacy area. We also use some of that money to purchase the enhanced version of iReady, which is the assessment we use at our middle school. And with that comes something called MyPath, which is an individualized technology-based learning piece for kids that looks at what students do on their main assessment on the iReady, which we give in the fall, winter, and spring. And then depending on that, they get customized supplemental pieces, via their technology. And that's something where the middle school has been creating some opportunities for students during the day and encouraging kids outside the day to make some use of that too. So we've made those additional investments. And so, as we think,
jump into
yes.
One more piece was Lexia, which is very similar to that iWritten piece. And similar to Dreambox, we already had that kind of computer adaptive resource for math, but we added Lexia, Core 5 and Power Up, which is for literacy for K through 6. So that's, again, one of those dynamic programs that adjust for individual needs. So that's also.
Thanks. I'd forgotten about the Lexia, but that was in there too. And so, as we talk about all of this, data is great, but the question is, what are we doing? And so it's important to remember what might we want to do next, but also what are we already doing?
Yeah.
And so we invested in the interventionist 2 years ago, and we invested in these extra instructional resources this year. And again, we'll need to make sure those things in the ESSER come on budget long-term so we can kind of support all of that, because some of these are one-time purchases, but a lot of these are subscriptions. That's kind of the way the world works today, and we need to maintain a funding of it for that. So that said, and I will also say, if you remember back when we talked about the DEI recommendations, we are coming back later in the year, once we've got data on the year with updates about how our students and interventions are progressing by different characteristics, but that's going to be more of a late spring.
Yeah.
So with that, when we looked at the report cards, state report cards earlier in the school year, we were talking about our target group data. And so I want to give a little bit of an overview to refresh us on what the target group is. So target group outcomes is one of the 4 priority areas on the state report cards. And it's relatively new. It just came in on the report cards last year, well, 2 years ago. So it's kind of a new component. And what it does is it's designed to shine a spotlight on every school and every district's target group, which the state defines as the students in the lowest quartile or the lowest 25% by achievement for that school or school district last year. So it's go back a year, look at the state test. What was the lowest 25%? Not the lowest 25% in the state, but school by school, district by district. So everybody has this. And then how do they progress on a variety of measures? And it's almost like a mini report card because they give you a target group score that gets into achievement, growth, and a lot of the things that, you know, in other parts of the report card would call the on track. So chronic absenteeism, attendance, and if it's a high school or a district with a high school graduation performance. And so it's a really important tool because it's looking at that most at-risk group. However, if you look at the second sub-bullet point, there must have at least 20 students in this group to be reportable for a school or district on the report card. And so one thing that comes into play here is we had target group scores for the district, intermediate, middle, and high school, but not for any of our 3 elementaries. And there's a reason for that, because the only grade in elementary schools we could have a target group for would be our 4th grade, because you need a pre-test on the state assessment to identify who your lowest 25% are. We have a K4 grade span, so that 3rd grade, that spring 3rd grade test identifies, is the first opportunity you have to identify a target group cohort, and then the state tracks that in their 4th grade year. Well, that 4th grade year is one cohort, and we split it across 3 schools. So we have no trouble getting to 20 for the district, and then even the high school, middle school, and intermediate. But when you're looking at just 1 grade and split it by 3 schools, we haven't yet reached a target group size of 20 yet. So we don't have reportable data on the report cards.
And there isn't a way to like combine the school, like 4th grade, just to,
So not for the state,
sure,
but that's what this is about.
okay, good.
So what we've done here, that's a great question. So what we've done here is, because what you see on the report card is basically a mini report card with a lot of statistical calculations, and then there's certain ways they combine the scores that we don't have the capacity to directly replicate. We can't generate a target group score for 4th grade, combining our 3 schools the way the state puts it on the report card. But there are other things we can do, because one thing the state gives us is they give us data files that say, here are the students in your target group. Even if you don't get to 20, you know what students from the file the state sends you would be in that group. They're part of your district file. And so what we can do then is use the other information we have and look at the forward exams. What we've done here is we've looked at achievement level. So when you take a test, you get a score, and then everybody's ranked in the percentile ranks. You know, we sometimes talk about the 20th percentile, 50th percentile, 60th, etc. So one thing we did was we looked at the 4th grade target group, and actually we did this for all the grades on the forward, so you could see better comparisons instead of presenting it in isolation. what is the average percentile rank for the target group? And then secondly, what was the proficiency rate? So of the kids in the target group, how many of them were proficient the next year? Now, it's important to understand when you're looking at a group that's picked for a low score. There's a phenomenon in all areas of life called regression to the mean. If you take a group that when you sample it, they're all at the high end. Well, for some, that was random variation, a good day, and they're going to maybe come back more towards the middle. Likewise, when you have something like the target group, where you're selecting a group based on low performance, then that might have been a bad day for some of those kids. And I'll put air quotes around that. But you know, we're not machines. We vary in our performance. You see that in athletics, you see it in the performing arts, you also see it academically. So some improvement in the target group is expected simply because it was a low sample and there's going to be some movement towards the middle. So just that's a little bit of background on that. But what we did was we looked at the percentile ranks. And so what was the average for our students in our target group? Now remember, that's our lowest 25%. If you were to take the target group for the state, those would be the students 25th percentile and below. And if you were to take the target group for the state, their average percentile rank, depending on the distribution a little bit, would be 12 or 13. So you can see that our target group actually, by the way you think about how you pick a target group, is a relatively high performing target group, just like as a district in our school, we're relatively high performing compared to the state. So the left-hand column shows you for grades 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, what their average percentile rank was the previous year. So when the 4th grade were 3rd graders, when the 8th grade were 7th graders, etc. What put them in the target group? And you can see what the average score was, average percentile rank, I should say. The next column over shows you this past spring in 2022, what was the average percentile rank for that same group? And then you can see the change on the right-hand side. And so you can see that for the target group, all of them increase. And you can see for 4th grade, of the 5 grades of the 5 cohorts represented here, the 4th grade increase was actually the second highest of the 5 groups last year for ELA. So that's one thing we know now about our target group was doing at the elementary level. The next piece does the same thing for mathematics.
I just need a real quick clarification, sorry. When
Yeah.
we say average percentile rank in the target group.
Yes,
So for 4th grade, we say 31.9%.
Yep.
Right. So that means that's within Waunakee School District.
yes,
They are,
Within Waunakee School District's lowest
yes,
quartile.
Right.
Not our whole fourth grade,
correct.
the target group. So our lowest 25th percentile, just that.
and their score is, the average score is 31%, 32%.
Compared to peers in the state, yes.
Okay, and it's 32% of what?
It's the percentile rate. So let's,
Percentile rank.
right.
Sorry, I just.
Well, no,
Trying to
no,
wrap my brain.
this is complicated, but so percentile ranks, it can be, you know, typically it's on the percentile, so it's a 100-point scale. And so the middle is the 50th percentile statewide. Now, our middle is higher than the 50th percentile. And so that's why our lowest quartile, and again, if you were to, and I don't have it right in front of me, if you were to look at our non-target group kids, their average percentile rank would have been 70 to 80, depending on the grade level.
So does this mean, and
I'm just trying to wrap my brain around
Yeah.
that. This means 30, they understand 31% of the information.
No,
That's
this
not what
would,
it
this would
means,
mean
right?
if you took our target group, for example, because it's a nice clean figure. When the target group that was in sixth grade last year were fifth graders,
Mhm.
of our students that were in the lowest quarter for the fifth grade forward in ELA. The middle kid in that group, so we're ranking all of our scores, we're slicing it into 4 equally sized quarters. The lowest scoring quarter locally, the middle kid in there was at the 30th percentile statewide,
Statewide,
yes.
got it.
And when you're looking at the chart. The kids, the fourth graders in 21%.
Yeah.
But the fourth graders in 22 used to be third graders.
Right, so this
So
is,
it's going down.
this is the same group, this is what they did in third grade. This is the same group of kids in fourth grade.
Okay, so that's not following the grades, it's following the kids.
Yes, I should have been a little more clear here, this was our fourth grade group, but this is actually a
group.
1 year look back.
Okay,
So this is the same set of kids. This is all matched. So this is how they moved in ELA. And this is how they moved in mathematics. Okay. And again, we see gains, if we go back, it was a 10.5 in ELA, it was a 7.7 for mathematics, but they're all moving up. The other thing we wanted to look at was what does it mean in terms of students scoring at proficient? Because we talked a lot when we talked about state assessments, what % of our students are proficient or advanced? So not surprisingly, for ELA, on the look back, none of the students were proficient in 2021.
None of the
We're in
schools.
the target.
Okay,
We're in the target group.
Okay.
Which, if I were to go into a meeting with a lot of our Amy's and my peers, this would be, nobody in the target group is going to be proficient. I will say, for both reading and math, we did have 1 or 2 grade levels where it was close, so the day may come where we actually may have some kids that are actually proficient in the local target group. We can only hope. But for 2022, this is what percentage in the target group were proficient the next year.
and so then they're no longer in the target group.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
The target group doesn't care whether you're proficient or not. It's just looking at your
This is
kids.
our lowest 20%.
Yeah.
Oh,
Our lowest 25th percentile is again, these generally are kids we want to provide extra support to.
yes,
But if you were to compare them against almost any other target group in the state, they would be higher
Higher
scoring
performing,
than the others.
I don't know, this question might be for later, but.
Yeah.
How does this data inform or correlate or help you decide what materials you're using, your instructional methods? If you see growth, you
Mhm.
say, well, good, but if you don't, do you look back and say, we got to get rid of this material?
Well, so here's one way to look at this. First of all, you want to see improvement. And if you didn't see, so if we were to go back and we didn't see percentile ranks going up, because remember, we should see a little bit of change just simply for regression. And if we saw no kids moving up to proficiency, that would be a huge red flag that we need to be doing something differently. Because, first of all, we are doing regression to the mean is operating at a very small level. I don't want to overstate its significance, but you're going to see a little movement simply based on regression. Secondly, we do invest resources to support these kids in their learning. So if you saw no change, that's a really good question, Judy. If you saw no change, you would be concerned. Now, I think the question is, how much change is appropriate to expect, and given the resources we're putting into it and how we're sizing our resources. So if I was to look at this, so And it's good to look at both of these side by side. So seventh grade ELA, none were proficient. 3.2 were proficient. That's probably like 1 or 2 kids. What does that mean? If I were to go back to the movement and percentile ranks, we also see 7th grade ELA. We only saw a very slight increase in the average percentile. When I look at that, I begin to question, is that pretty much what you'd expect simply based on regression? So I look at this and it does make me want to think a little bit about 7th grade. Okay, but in other areas, I mean, automatically, the other areas we see increases. And so we would say, well, we expect to see increase. Good, we're seeing increases. And particular to why we're bringing this back, we had that blank data for 4th grade. It was like, well, what does that 4th grade data look like compared to the others? And we see that we've got movement, which is a good thing. And again, for the math, again, you can see the move up in the math proficiency. And so the first thing is, if you saw really small numbers, like for 7th grade ELA, you might want to take a look at what's the universal, what are the supports, go back and look at other years of data to kind of see what's going on here, because is it a 1-year blip, or is this a more ongoing issue we really need to roll up our sleeves on? Then when you see something more like this, where there's a lot of movement, then you get to the next question is, and again, I think each of us as a parent, when we think about our child, nothing is too much to do for our children. When it's your individual child, is there such a thing as good enough? You always want the best for your kids. I think as a school system, we have to say, how do these numbers look? What is the growth? And that's one reason we're on the report cards. We can compare. And if you think back to the report card presentations we had, we could look at some of our target group performance compared to Dane County, compared to peers, and what does that look like? This exercise is really just intended to kind of bridge into our elementary schools a bit, because if we go all the way back here, when we were looking at the report card data, we had no report card data for the target groups for the elementaries. And so we wanted to kind of explore that a little further to put it in context. Because again, for the target outcomes, how was the achievement? How was the growth of the target group? What did their absenteeism look like? And what was their attendance, or graduation? And so then you look at things like the growth of the achievement, how do they compare to peer districts? And, where do you go next?
So are you happy with the numbers?
So I would say the 7th grade number for ELA has me wanting to go back and do the trouble is we don't have testing for spring of 2020, and then we had some disrupted assessment. It does make me want to go back and look historically at that to see if that's a 1-year thing, or it's a larger pattern, because that really does stand out. It's not just the percentile rank, you then see it on the proficiency percentage. It really stands out as a low gain area. So if that were a trend across multiple years, then we would want to be doing some things. And I think the middle school is already, using the MyPath for reading and math on the iReady. We are looking at some things in terms of writing instruction. Now that's a part of this, it's not the entire part of it.
So a trend, you need to let your interventions work a little bit to see that they're working. And so a trend has to be several years. And so we can't jump at every year that something happens. We've got to look at it all, right?
Right, you can't jump at every year. You need to look at multiple years of data. I do think a challenge is by the time we look at this, we're sitting here in the winter for tests that were given primarily in April. So there's already some retrospective, and that's just for 1 year of data. So, it's always, you don't want to overreact to 1 year, But you also don't want to wait till you've got 5 years of data. You might want to, 2 or 3 years might be enough to draw a conclusion if there's something happening there.
Is this a new way that we're looking at the data as a school district, or is this something that we look at? Like, we expect we're gonna look at this data? Is this something you look at every year? Or is
Well,
this a new way to kind of is this a? new way
It
that
is,
we're-
I mean, so we look at a lot of things over time. The reason why the target group is valuable is the state is doing these calculations on the report card to not only tell you, this is all very much based on things that would be in this achievement subscore in the target group. The state is also using their value added formula, which we can't replicate,
Okay,
to give us subscores for growth for the target group. And because it's on the report card, we can look at, again, for schools that get to 20. But you can look at every district in the state and most schools in the state to kind of see what their scores are. So you can not only look at your achievement subscore, you can say, well, what's the value added growth for the kids in our target group compared to Economowalk, compared to Middleton, et cetera. And then you can see, again, how your target group kids compare to other groups in terms of kind of absenteeism, attendance at graduation, because you're dealing with students who need additional support. They have challenges. Now, all of those challenges are in-school challenges. They have individual characteristics. They may have out-of-school challenges. So it's helpful to put your data in context by looking at other schools or districts that are similar to yours. And, that can help see where you fit in the larger picture. This is only the second year we've had the target group, and the first year was kind of coming out of the pandemic, or is more disrupted data, but it's really valuable from that aspect. But again, when we looked at this a few months ago, we had this whole NA here, and so that's why we wanted to go in and again, for elementary, the reason why it's the NA is because it's only a number generated by your 4th grade kids. You've got to have 20. Our target group doesn't currently get to 20 in any of our 3 elementary schools. But the answer to your question, I think, Katie, is yes, this is valuable because it allows us to not only look at things locally, it allows us to kind of look at other districts and see where we fit in relatively. That can help us make interpretations about how we're doing, but also, if I'm wondering about the 7th grade piece, I can look for middle schools. Jeff and I can look at middle schools that might have stronger growth subscores than a 41.3 for the target group, and then look at those practices. And that's partly what we do plan to do some of. this
Yes.
spring.
So you're bringing this to us kind of in response to some of the questions that you had at our last meeting, right?
Yeah.
So this is good.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think to kind of summarize it, the reason why we had to do this is our target group for the elementary is only 1 grade and it's split over 4 free schools. So that means we don't get a reportable score on the report card. But what we found when we at least looked at the achievement increases as looking at comparing proficiency rates and comparing average percentile rank, we see that the 4th grade increases are higher than the increases in the middle school, and on balance, not as high as the intermediate school, but close. And this is generally true for both ELA and mathematics, but this is 1 year of data. And I think it's possible that as our schools get bigger, and again, the target group is based on a pretest, and that pretest for this was the spring of 2021, where we still had complicated testing. We still had, if you remember at that time, 1/4 to 1/3 of our kids in virtual. We invited those families to bring their students in for testing. Many did, but many didn't. So I think it's likely, I'm cautiously optimistic that in a year or 2, we'll be able to see a state calculated elementary.
Because, I mean, we have you know, approaching 100 students.
Right.
at Most of the elementary schools, so if we don't have a lot of opt-outs, we should be generating a target
Exactly.
for the future. So then we wouldn't have to do this separate calculation, it would just be on that chart initially.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so. This is great, and I apologize for being late, especially because for this on the agenda to start with, but. This compares us to other districts. We still don't need that. We've got the tests that show 52% below proficiency.
Mhm.
And so. My bigger question isn't how are we doing compared to districts? What are we doing to see how internally,
Mhm.
how that 52% are advancing based upon the instruction, and I don't care if it's in elementary or middle school. How are we charting the success of those, especially, and I don't care if they're just a tad below proficient. But how do we know what we're doing is working to help them advance to a higher level
Mhm.
internally?
Mhm.
Are we monitoring in, or is this our monitoring system? I reflect back as a teacher and. I never got data that Janie was reading at the 25th percentile. So that, I mean, I had to make. After a couple of weeks, I could see who was where and. Sometimes modify the instruction I was doing to meet their needs, but no one gave me a blueprint of. Johnny or Janie to say, oh, they've got severe reading problems, so be aware of it.
Mhm.
Well, we do the test and they failed it. They do the quiz and they failed it because their reading capacity was. Not good enough to keep up with some of the other kids. And then you finally catch on. So to me, back then. The system was broken in terms of the kids who weren't reading, I wasn't doing anything special because I didn't know I had to do anything special
Mhm.
until after weeks of failure.
Mhm.
So I guess that's my concern is how are we internally monitoring these kids to make sure we're doing the right thing? That is working.
That's a really good question, Mark, and I think is something that is still true today is high school teachers. You're in the high school. We don't do benchmark testing like with the STAR or the iReady at the high school, like we do in the elementary schools, the intermediate schools, the middle schools. There's no equivalent in high school English to doing the benchmark assessments for reading level that elementary and intermediate school teachers do. So, I do think there's always been that question as you transition to a focus on GPA, accumulating credits and graduation requirements, and you focus more on the courses and a little less at kind of the more fundamental achievement profile. I do think there are questions, and we can bring in the high school team. It's been a few years since we brought them in to talk about kind of their support system model and how they handle transitions from the middle school. I think there's always been that tension there for high schools. Is how do you move from a non-credit based profile to a profile that's more credit based. And so if you're a ninth grade English teacher or a ninth grade math teacher, how much you know about the prior learning of students coming out of the gate in September to make modifications without the student beginning to show some things in later progress reports. But below high school, we do have running records like the benchmark assessment system. We do have assessments like iReady and the STAR And the teacher teams do look at those fairly early in the year and make adjustments. I mean, that's where intervention groups come into it. And, at the middle school, a big focus of theirs this year has been looking at students who not only could benefit from the math or reading workshops, but could also benefit from, encouragement to be active in the My Path. So we look at kids. I think the question, and we talked about this very briefly earlier, is when we look at this, we want every student to have a high level of success. The question is, what additional things should we be doing as a system that we aren't currently doing to support the work of our teachers? Because our teachers do look at this with kids.
Right. And I guess that's. So. From personal experience, it appears to me that a very small percentage of our kids qualify for intervention.
Mhm.
Of that group that are below proficient. And so. Is Janie, who is at the 40th percentile versus, the
Mhm.
proficient level, is she always going to be at 40% because we don't have a program to help her? And the teacher doesn't have time to, basically she's getting the same programming that Johnny's getting, who's advanced proficient.
I would say that,
How do we do
at the
that?
universal level, at the elementary, there is a great deal of differentiation. So while they all receive their, 2 hours of ELA instruction with their classroom teacher, the classroom teacher is differentiating based on student need. That's a huge part of our model. And so they aren't getting the same thing. They're getting some universal core instruction on our grade level, like comprehension, vocabulary, certainly. But their individual reading level is very customized with what they're reading so that we can grow all students.
But aren't they? We say we're doing that. But is Janie going from the bottom 40th in terms of achieve on the test? Is she in 3 years up to proficient? I mean, I guess that's what percent of our kids who are below proficient ever get to proficient?
So on the I almost said WKC on the forward. So that's at least one measure that shows some of our students in the lowest 25th percentile of our district did reach proficiency. And again, it's important to remember that I know Tim has mentioned this before, the proficiency cutoff for ELA is quite high. So there are students who would be at the 50th percentile, which is average, what we would expect, and they would be considered basic on that measure.
One of the things, it's a lot of data to wrap your brain around and try and understand. But one of the things we talked about was growth. And that we scored high in achievement, but our growth was not where other schools were. But then when we break out our target group, we see that that target group did grow and that they did grow more than other schools. Am I interpreting that the right way?
So we would have to go, when we looked at this, it was district level data. That was part of the presentation. So when we look at our target groups, achievement compared to other districts is very high. I think within our comparison group, our target group had the 3rd highest overall achievement rate as a district, not getting into this level or that level. But the target group growth, although better than our overall growth, was relatively low compared to some of our peers.
So
From the district level, but.
At the
there
district
were
level.
Some schools that had 100%, or I mean, not, a sort of 100 for growth in math, for example.
Yeah.
Many were above the state average for growth for ELA, so as a district, that was below, but if you look at individual schools, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay. So,
Middle
Is
school
it-
is a particular area of attention.
yes,
Right.
and is it fair to say that? Kind of to piggyback on what Mark was saying, that the students that don't fall in that target group.
Mhm.
The rest of the students are not growing at the same rate. They're staying at the same spot. They're not growing. Like we have high achievement, but they're not growing.
It depends where you're looking. I mean, I think to Amy's point, certainly if you were to look at some of our elementary schools, particularly in math, but also to a degree in ELA, you see high levels of growth
Okay.
compared to, but I would say middle school would definitely be an area that we are looking at.
Well, that's the anomaly. I don't know how you guys analyze it because. It's amazing to me, and it seems to be an every year thing. You look at the intermediate achievement levels.
Mhm.
And they're typically extremely high.
Mhm.
And then also middle school and kids where you had kids who are. You had X% at proficient and above, and also middle school, boom, it bottoms out.
Mhm.
And to me, that's gotta be something more than an academic. Problem. It's, I don't know if it's attitudinal, I don't know if it's cultural. But it's a phenomenon that seems to happen. It's a consistent thing. High scores, middle schools, and they go down, and it's not the instruction they're getting, I'm sure of that, and it's not.
Well, it's partly choices we make as a district. The question, so for example, I mean, I think we will always see differences in growth between the intermediate and the middle school by the intentional design of our program. So again, we're looking at ELA and mathematics. Students at the intermediate school typically would get on a daily basis 80
Like 84, 88
Right.
minutes.
of ELA
ELA
and mathematics
math.
each.
Yeah.
You get to the middle school, that's cut in half.
Right, but that shouldn't change. You bring that skill set with you. You don't have some you don't lose that in a year. And all of a sudden,
Well,
you're a
they're-
poor
they're-
writer and you're a poor reader than you were a year ago.
Well, and that's not what is necessarily happening. Their achievement, middle school achievement is high. So it's not like they lose ground. But all of a sudden, their rate of growth on the state tests really decelerates in middle school. Now, part of that is because we have smaller blocks of instructional time for ELA and mathematics at our middle school, which really operates more on a junior high model compared to the intermediate school. And in many middle schools across the state, students would have bigger blocks of time for mathematics and ELA than they do in our middle school. Now, the flip side of that is that we have a pretty strong level of access to career and technical education, other electives at the middle school level. We have an ag program that all kids get in 7th grade and can elect to take in 8th. So that's something that most middle schools do not have. We've done that as a district because we think those can be engaging learning for kids. And we feel it helps prepare them for high school and making decisions for life beyond high school. But the trade-off for that is we give up some instructional time in ELA and mathematics. And I think the big question for us when we look at growth of the middle school is how much of the deceleration in growth is due to programmatic decisions that we knowingly made with other goals in mind that are probably good goals for kids. And how much of it is, well, yeah, even with 45 minutes a day of ELA and mathematics, we should be seeing different numbers than we're seeing. And I think part of it's design, but I do think we have areas that we can improve upon, even with the existing allocation of time at the middle school. And one thing we did mention earlier, Mark, is, we are going to bring back our intervention results in the spring. So for the kids who, and I think you bring up a good point. So when we talk about the target group, this is again driven kind of by the state model. It's certainly the case that 25% of our students are not receiving interventions. And actually that would be the case probably in any school in the state. You don't have 20. So I think your question about what happens with a student who is not, whose outcomes on the state assessments are not at the district middle, but they're not profiling low enough to receive specific interventions. What does differentiation and additional support look like for them? Okay, so I mean, I think that's an important question. Then there's the question of, for the students who do get those designated supports, are they making the progress that we are hoping for them to make when we get those additional supports for them? And so that second question is certainly the one we're going to be bringing back in the spring.
Thank you.
Okay, I think with that, we're probably for now on to the next part. So if you can take us there, Rebecca. Awesome.
So the next item on our agenda is had to have a discussion, provide feedback on the curriculum presentations moving forward.
Yeah, you brought that up last time, and we won't be able to make big adjustments to the model for this month's presentation, but if this is a model that we continue, we'd be really interested in hearing your feedback on the format in general. Do you like having the 4 groups? Do you like the twice a year? Is there certain content you'd like me to share? Like, we can shape this however you'd like for next year. So
When you say that we can't make changes, do they already have a presentation for us developed?
I mean, they've known about this since August, so some might, and maybe some are still going to do it later this month. But yes, they've known, like, okay, this is my time, and I know I have 25 minutes, and I know I'm gonna share a success and something we're working on, like, so they have those parameters. I did mention, when we had the chairs together at our system-wide meeting, that you would be interested in kind of like courses that they offer, so I did give them that, and I think that's easy for them to add in. But if you wanted, more comprehensive changes, that wouldn't be something that you could add for the video.
I think that's a hard thing. I'm having prepared for them myself. It's what does the board want versus what would you like to share with the board?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yes,
Because you've got certain things that are changing and evolving too, but then as a board, what do we want? And you only have 25 minutes.
Right.
So if as a board, we want to get an overview of all the courses being taught or subjects being taught in the curriculum, that's all you're going to get. It versus this is how we're changing our instructional model, which might be important to hear too. I mean, the science thing I thought was kind of interesting, but we didn't get into a lot of the courses. And so I guess as a board, we have to be aware too that they've got 25 minutes to share something. And so what is it we want them to share?
I also wonder about keeping it subject when it's K-12 or keeping it elementary and high school presentations. I think it's real difficult to hear what science is doing from K-12.
That's a good suggestion. Or good feedback, I think. Because to cover 25 minutes for K-12, and they all have different
I think when they even have meetings, do they all meet K-12?
Well, yes, that's our model, and so
Oh.
we do have, well, we have, you know, obviously the different
Yeah,
schools,
they
the
break out.
departments are generally K-12. We do have special ed broken up into two departments and ELA broken up into two departments. So in January, you'll hear 7-12 ELA. Because that department is divided, but by and large, the teachers do all meet together for that vertical alignment, and they do have just the one chairperson for those departments, although they would have other teachers that are coordinators. So we could certainly talk about that. That would then reduce your frequency because it would take up twice as long to kind of get through some of the
But I think,
departments.
Mark's point is that, what do they want us to know and what do we want to ask them are
Right.
often two different, and I felt it, the last one, it was more than I cared to know. That maybe sounds bad, but, I didn't know the underlining stuff, like when you look at, it's been a long time since elementary, what stuff is covered in a general sense? How deep do you get into science and math, and you know, it's the basics, but through fourth grade. You're introducing a lot, and do we still do phonics, do we do writing, some of the nitty gritty of it, do we do that, or do we incorporate that into the subject? Then I'm also thinking, when does differentiation of classes start? And does it start like in the intermediate school or the middle school? When I say differentiation, are there different levels of math that you can get into? And when does that start? Does it start before high school? And at the high school level, you're trying to reach graduation requirements. And are there different pathways or support to get everybody to graduate with the kind of education that they need? Because I think there's a big difference there. Not just grade point, but the course content, because we've sometimes eliminated some of the more basic classes, saying that's not fair to be. Everybody should, like, I remember everybody had to have algebra in ninth grade, which was kind of a disaster for many. And then what do you do when you can't get it? So have we changed curriculum so that we help people who aren't making proficiency in areas to go on to the next level? And I don't know if that comes in with the presentation of the teachers. I don't know if there was something else I had. And again, the span of the course content in the high school would be very interesting for me. You don't have to give me a lot of details, but you know, do we still have agriculture? What do we have in the? We used to call them industrial arts. I don't know what we call it now, but some of those career paths and some of the ones that are even developed before I had any idea, you know, the tech ed and the diversity of those kind of programs. That's what I would like to hear about.
I'm wondering about if some of that would be things that we could bring in to this group. We used to meet kind of at the end of the day and would have teachers come in more regularly than we have had in the last couple of years. But I'm thinking even like, you know, when the course catalog comes out in January, you know, like we could take a look at it and we could have some highlights or something. Would that be a good way to get that information, do you think? Or
Yeah, I don't think it has to be the whole board necessarily, but if we're the curriculum committee,
yeah,
I don't know what the curriculum
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and so,
Yeah, see, and that's actually though, and again, that's for the evolution of what happened. We used to, at this committee, people, they would come here. And then it evolved to, well. And then they'd have their night before the whole board. And so instead of doing, because the board got too bogged down with, every month there was a curriculum group coming in. And those meetings were going like, and that's where they got consolidated. Into what we saw in November and we'll be seeing again. And so. That's how it changed.
Right.
But at that time, that was initially, that was sort of how it was. It was sort of, okay, these are a kind of a review of what's being offered at the high school in English. And then some groups would bring in a budgetary issue to sneak it in at the meeting, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. We need this, you know.
As long as you're here,
Yeah, as long as we're here, we could use an extra $100,000,
Right.
you know, but, or it was, you know, when they switched to the new math program, that was a really, because that was, ended up being like a 5-12 thing. And so we did get a sense of it, and so I get what you're saying, you know, if it's totally left up to the teacher group to bring in what they want, we may miss something, and so setting the guideline, this is what we like to see, and
Right.
I think to your point with the science, then, you know, to try to get everything in 25 minutes is a huge rush. You might then need to have, okay, 20 minutes for the high school science and 20 minutes for the K6 science, because they're two different entities, and you want to know more about what's going on there.
I think sometimes the teachers approach these presentations as, because they're living in their curriculum, you know, this whole thing, like, oh, what's something new we can tell the board? about?"
Right,
Like, that's
right.
how they approach it,
Yeah,
instead of how can we educate the board on, you know, kind of our core curriculum. And so if your goal is, we want all the board members to kind of hear what the core curriculum is, like, we can give that direction to the chairs, and that's what those could be. But then you would miss out perhaps on something that's important to them that they might
Right.
share with you. So it just
well, and then you
depends.
throw in the other question is, as a board, how much do we get involved with that stuff? How much of it, you know, we have you to be looking at the numbers and telling us there's a problem here, look at this. But we don't necessarily have to be involved in as much information as sometimes we're getting. We're coming from a, you know, certainly not a well-versed background to understand all this. You're explaining it really well, but how much do we have to do as a board? Where do we?
So I feel like that was kind of part of this, was just to kind of immerse you in the work of the departments, and kind of celebrate and kind of see what kids are doing, and not to, you know, dive deeper into what curriculum choices did you
And
make.
we don't
But-
want to influence the curriculum
Right,
choices
so
either.
it's just more like, oh, I didn't even know we had culinary arts doing
Yeah.
pastries, and oh, you know, it's to learn a little bit about that, I think, is how we initially intended it. But if we wanted to shape it more as, here's an overview of the courses, or here's an overview of the curriculum resources that they're using, or something like that, I think you could.
So were you on the egg thing? Or did you miss it?
I had to leave the egg.
See, and I thought that was done really well.
Yeah.
I thought they did what you're asking
Yeah.
for, kind of a better understanding what the whole program is like.
Yeah,
And so they did it, you know,
Yeah.
to that end, but if that's what we want, then I think that's gotta be clarified. What is the purpose of these? So that they're better prepared to meet that purpose.
And the egg one might have been a little bit different too, because it's offered 7 to 12.
Right,
And so that kind of gets back to that.
easier
Right, I
to,
don't wanna say it exactly, I don't wanna say it's easy, because I know that they put a lot
Oh,
of
sure.
work
into
in.
that.
Definitely.
But when you're dealing with a more limited.
It's a focus.
Yeah,
Right, and so I think. The concept of for the cores, we may need to unpack that by level, that's good feedback.
See, the math one I thought was so rushed. They tried to do the same thing. But to me, they had so much, you know, and so each level had about a 3-minute, you know, input on it, and when you're looking at the K-12 enterprise, it's so much harder to share meaningful, because,
for math.
yeah, for math
On a
alone,
heat subject
right,
matter, you know,
right.
for
how
K
how
through
many
12,
of these
so.
do we do a year? 4?
Two a year with 4 at.
Okay, so what? Would it be so bad if one year our focus was K6 and the next year it was 7-12? I mean,
in the core courses.
yeah, I mean, this year we're hearing from the elementary and middle school, and you know, next year we're gonna hear from the high school or whatever. Is that a way to focus it too?
Sure, we certainly could look at it that way.
And, you know, when our next session is with 7 through 12 ELA.
They're one of the four. We'll have them. We will have art,
And two others.
which
Because,
we've
you
got a
know,
great sheet
I
now.
think it's good feedback, because we implemented a new phonics or phonics for K through 3. And that's something that if we covered K through 12, there's so many things.
Right.
And I think we would want to know, I don't,
Yeah, so ELA is naturally divided, so that one.
so that'll be
Yeah.
good.
But I think, looking at kind of math and science and dividing those, although they just did theirs this year, but you know, the next time they're
Yes.
up, splitting it. And we could even, do Judy's model where it's the whole year, but it could be maybe the first one of the year is kind of K6 and the second one is 7-12, and then you could see, oh, we heard about K6
Yeah.
math in the fall and now this one
Yeah.
is
Right.
7-12.
Yeah.
Something like
Yeah.
that,
I do think we need to break down the
Yeah.
12 grades.
yeah.
And the answer to who you will see on the 30th,
Mhm.
I pulled up the sheet. 712 ELA are world language
Okay.
and business and marketing.
So that's mostly.
Now, world language, that'll be a K-12, right?
That'll be a
Right.
Yes.
K-12.
Which elementary Spanish could be its own thing, probably.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Is there a lot of world language in it? See, I didn't know that. How young do we teach world language?
We teach social studies through Spanish, starting in kindergarten.
What?
Yeah, see, and that's a good point, 'cause that happened before you were on the board. You know, and so to understand the whole system.
After my grandchildren were
Yeah.
done. That's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you do.
so we teach social studies through Spanish as like a special, so in art, music, world language.
So the kids are learning their social studies in Spanish?
Yes. Yep. At the elementary level.
American Revolution in Spanish?
No, that would be 5th and 6th
Yeah.
grade, and that's in English. But so it's community, it's, you know, some math skills, it's, you know, and obviously, you know, so use English. But then in 4th grade or some of our Wisconsin concepts, the classroom teachers do teach social studies.
Well, you know, this is so important because we have people that come and speak and they say, we just need to get back to reading and writing. And you're doing all these other things. And it's like, they don't realize that we are, you know, there's a real focus on that. That, I mean, that was the concern for a lot of people when we were saying we were doing SEL. They said, well, you're taking your time away from the basics. So I don't think the community necessarily knows what the curriculum is either. So,
Right,
I don't know how to get that out, but
yeah.
Well, and that's been a focus of, I think, the policy committee conversations. There are some updates we'll be making, so where people have an interest, they can have more ready access to the frameworks we're using. But then there's, what can you get easily when you want to know versus what gets put out there for you to be aware of, and it's an interesting concept, but. I mean, I will say this, I mean, I think, you know, and Amy mentioned that. It probably would have value to you as a committee, separate from this entire process. We have our high school course guide for registration for next year. It's not a bad idea for us to bring that in to next meeting or the meeting after to walk you through it, to get a sense of the scope of the high school program, because you know, it seems like yesterday, but you've been retired for a few years, Mark,
Yeah,
and
more than a couple.
more than a couple, and you know, other than, I mean, Katie, your kids are in, Ed's kids are in. Ryan
As a son.
has one son who's still, I mean, but yeah, I think it would be good. And again, some parents work on a gradual release of responsibility model where you're not necessarily helicoptering over their course choices either. So we can bring that in to kind of get to that for the high school piece quite easily.
and maybe that's my responsibility is to look at that as part of the committee. To know that stuff.
I think it's good for you to know that stuff, but then I think it's our role to help you do that, so you don't have to put on your
Read it.
houndstooth hat and your magnifying glass and go. look.
Okay, so. Some of the notes that I took were that we recommend splitting some of those core contents by level of basics and 7-12 like we do for ELA. Perhaps next year having a maybe K6 focus in the fall and 7-12 focus in the spring. Bringing in some more kind of informational items here. And then in terms of like your purpose, should we direct the chairs to focus kind of on their courses and content, or should we focus on, you know, new happenings that they want to inform you about?
I like the course content.
Well, and within that. I think. The new would be part of that, wouldn't it?
Sure, yes.
You know, for example, if you're looking at, I look at when we. I think it was right after the intermediate school opened or right before the new one. They were implementing, they're looking at a new math program. And I mean, and that was a 6-12 enterprise where the 5-6 came first and then the 7-8 and then 9-12, we're trying to figure how, you know, how this would transition in. And so when you're doing the math, that would have been part of the whole thing is that.
Right, sure,
We,
yes.
this is what we're doing.
Mhm.
Now, this committee was privy to it initially anyways, because they come to us with a plan for the study.
Right.
But then as a whole board, you start seeing how this whole thing fit in at the presentation. So to me, you can do the overview and still, okay, this is a new initiative that we're making changes. Social studies. These are the courses that we're offering, but these are two we want to talk about, especially because they're new ones. And we think you should know about them. Why did these happen? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Sure,
That's,
So there's a way that,
that's super helpful.
yeah,
We will pass that along.
thank you, that's a good discussion.
Mhm.
So moving on, to the next item on our agenda was, is regarding school goal presentations and items covered. This is something that was brought up in our last meeting regarding, what our school goals are related to, academics or outcomes. And so,
Yeah, so again, we just want to provide some guidelines for our colleagues. So when they come in to share their school goals with you, what kind of information would you like, you know, any certain points you want them to hit, time frame, just outcomes for them presenting their school goals to you.
Are these individual schools with autism?
Yes,
Okay. So every elementary has their own school
Yes.
goals.
so it'd be all 6 of our buildings.
and I would say for this committee, the goals would be around, academics and outcomes if we have, and related to curriculum. Because I would imagine we have school goals about budget and
Oh,
I don't know.
yeah, so
You
this
know.
would be primarily focused on,
learning goals.
yeah.
Learning, yeah.
But it may also include SEL, which I think is appropriate for this group too. Yes, so these are ones that are created by their teacher teams as part of their school improvement
Yeah.
institute, so yes. So that,
Learning goals.
yes. So you'd like them to come in and kind of share their goals. Maybe their action steps or.
To
how
this
they're-
committee or to the board?
I think it was recommended to this committee.
I brought this up.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why is I think to myself, okay, so we have priorities as a school board, and one of them is around academic excellence. That's our priority. So. And then we get presentations about the report cards and how they come about, where we're at. And I know, Judy, you've asked the question. We've all kind of, is this where we want to be? Is this where you see we should be at? Is this what you're expecting? You know, and so I think as a board, it helps us, for me, understand better what the focuses are of the leadership of the schools so that we can help support them when we're making decisions. So we're getting this data
Is it where we want to be? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do something different? Is this in line with where you want it, where our leadership wants us to be? You know, that's kind of what I don't know if I'm articulating that the right way, but.
I just want to make sure, you know, if we ask them to come in, that they meet your expectations, you know, your outcomes. So I think most of the schools have 2 goals typically. So we'll ask them to come in, kind of share their goal, and share the action steps that their teachers have outlined to kind of meet those goals. They could give maybe mid-year progress if appropriate for the goal. Is that the sort of information?
Yeah, so let me ask this then, so, because that's really an interesting thing. And again, historically, I think this group, actually, Tim, I don't know if did they used to come before the full board or just this committee? We had that kind of a presentation.
So
Usually in the
sometimes they
fall.
came into the full board, but also in the past, the board has had a goals committee that was discontinued when we brought the DEI in. And so this, given the nature of the school improvement plans, this is probably the committee to replace goals in that regard.
So I guess my question is, so they would come in the early fall. Here are goals, bing, 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 bing. Would it be more beneficial, rather than having them come in the fall, say, these are our goals, to come in mid-year and say, I mean, we could get their goals in a written format.
Yeah.
But rather than having them come into the fall and then mid-year and have them come in mid-year and say, okay, you saw our goals. Here's what's happening so far, sort of a mid-year report on where we're going, something to that. Would that be more valuable to
Yes.
us rather than coming in, these are our goals? And how, and then, well, you know,
I mean, I think it's good to know what the goals are,
right,
and they don't need to present it. They can tell us, and we get it written in an email or whatever, right? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, but
At the beginning.
so
At the beginning, so. we
would it be
know.
better to have them come, if we want them, I want their time to be meaningful.
Right.
And ours, so do you want them to come in later, reporting on the progress of the goals, but we get the goals in advance, you know,
Yes.
you know,
But I think there's
is
a
that what we
logistic,
want as a committee?
there's a logistic for that, and I like having, you know, I wasn't thinking that they come in the beginning, but more in the middle toward the last part of the year. How is the year gone in reaching your goals? But there's 6 schools.
Right.
How are we gonna fit that all in? And so I don't worry that they come every year and do that. If we can just start on a couple of them and then space them out. Or
Like we do the curriculum groups.
yeah, yeah. As long as it's coming to us in an orderly fashion that we're gonna review this. But I really don't want them in the fall saying, these are my goals. I think you're right. I think we need to see. And which will also maybe, help them reflect on what's my goal for next year then, if, you know, if this is where we are now, this might inform my goals for later, but.
I mean, something to think about. We can definitely get you the school improvement plans or the goals at the start of the year. We can get them to you. We can get them to you now before, but I mean. I think, Amy, you would know best, but I would imagine the elementary schools would want to come in together potentially.
They don't necessarily craft their goals together, though. I mean, they do, it is a school goal. There is quite a bit of collaboration and overlap, but it is their SII that generates the goals.
And even if you had 2 coming in together, it just would. I don't want them to take a whole lot of time and go in depth. That's,
I agree.
I don't want to grill them on things.
No, I don't either. I just think it helps as a board for us to be able to make decisions or to support them. And to know what they're focused on and what they need and what their goals and priorities are, just to make sure we're aligned.
Is that taking away from administration's role?
Well, I mean, for me, it's not necessarily that we have to have a presentation. I think it would be good to know what the goals are, I think, and where we're at. Where are we meeting our goals, and do we need more. As we're
Support.
support, yeah.
So maybe it's not necessarily a presentation, maybe it is just, you know, as they're doing their mid-year evaluations internally, we could share that information, we could collect that and share that with you, or,
I mean-
or as Judy said, kind of have a sampling of them throughout the various, you know, on a cycle, or we're open, we just want to, do whatever.
I think we have an oversight responsibility, but we also have a chain of command.
Right.
And I don't want to jump in the middle of that.
I don't either. I don't wanna micromanage it or say, this is what your goal should be, or this is what you need to do. I just want to know what they are. I guess that's all. And so that as we're. And, you know, I'm new at this, but like, as we're making decisions about supporting our school district, I think it's good to know what the experts are working towards. I certainly am not saying that I want to set the goal, or I think I know what we need. But I think it's good to know that we're all in line. So I don't necessarily think we need a presentation on it, but. You know, when we ask the question, is this where we want to be? Like, is this where we see ourselves? Is this what we want to be, or do we want to be in a different place, or?
Well, you know, you don't want a presentation. I kind of like presentations. I don't want another report, but I don't, you know, it's.
Yeah.
It's
Whatever
Little of everything.
is the best way to communicate it, I guess.
You're quiet.
Yeah. Whatever we do, I guess it needs to be meaningful. And worth the time put into it. And so, and that's why when we started talking about looking at their goals, I mean, that we can see in black and white, and it's sort of like some of the things I've always had problems with presentations. You got a PowerPoint. Don't read your PowerPoint to me.
Yeah.
You know, I can read it. Talk to me about what's the important things. And so, and we don't want to waste time. And so I don't need the three, let's just say the K4 administrators come in and say, these are our goals. They can write that down.
Yeah.
So what do I want them to do? And so maybe it's like a March-ish. They do come in to talk about the goals in the sense of, okay, these were our goals, this was working. This is what we see as needing to do more work. So we have a sense of accomplishment. That to me would be worthwhile, but I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, yes.
And to me, that would be a worthwhile discussion to hear as a committee. I don't know if it needs to go to the board as a curriculum committee, though, that would be maybe a worthwhile thing to hear them at the 2/3 of the year mark. How are you going? How's it working? And moving forward, what do you see as a need from the board?
Yes.
Which then makes it worthwhile for them to share that
Yes.
need in terms of the budgetary issues. And what we can provide them.
Yes.
Is that where you're
Thank you.
looking?
Yes.
So we're at the halfway mark of the year right now. I mean, I think if we do start to bring these in over your next 2 to 3 meetings, we're roughly going to be at that point in your budget cycle.
Yeah,
And I'm not as concerned getting all 6 schools in 1 year. I can spread them out. But I like that end of the year for the last quarter, that's quarter.
well, maybe then do you want to break it up like we do the curriculum thing, right? Okay, year 1 is going to be K4, year 2 it'll be 5, 8, and then year 3 it's the high school. I mean, you know, is that and you're on that cycle, is that what
cycles are good. I mean, then we don't forget people.
So the one thing I'll put out there. And I think whichever direction would be really valuable, but. If you do a few a year, like the curriculum presentations, then it sounds to me like it's a multi-year. Conversation about what have you learned from your school improvement plans? And longer term, how can we support you? That could be kind of a deeper conversation. But if there's an interest in it informing budgetary decisions, I don't know. That you want to only see some of them in any given budget cycle. You probably want everybody to be in
Maybe
annually.
like a February, March, April kind of
Right.
approach.
But just because they don't present it to us in this kind of
Right.
meeting, doesn't mean they shouldn't be going to the budget or asking for
Well,
things.
that's what I was. just
Right.
about
Anyway,
to
this
say.
is not the first.
We
place.
already have a process for budget. I mean, if somebody has a budget need, they're gonna propose it during our process.
Regardless.
They're not going to wait and say, well, when I have my school goal presentation, I'll ask the board about it. I mean, we have a process
Yeah.
for that.
And I would hope that's what they would do.
Yeah.
So I agree with that, and yet, if. You have two principals and they both put something into the budget process. And by the time that gets to you typically, it's on a sheet of paper. With maybe some high level comments from Randy or Amy or me. And then another principal has the same things on that sheet of paper. But she's been in here to kind of talk about the details of what she's working on in her school with you as a committee, who are 3 of the 7 board members. How might that play out in the conversations in the budgeting process?
Well, we're not on budget, are we? Or maybe you are. I can, yeah, but I see this, the purpose is really different. I think budgeting is something different. This is information. How is your school doing? What's the overview for us, not the.
And it could even, for me, it could come from you guys too. What their goals are, how they're doing, I think, it doesn't necessarily have to. For me. What they're. But, I think it's a good suggestion to have them come in at the, like Mark said, at the, 2/3 of the way through the school year. It lines up with other things that we're working through as a school board. But if that, for me, if it comes from you, or if it comes from the principals, it's, information I think is important to know.
But to Mark's point, it has to have value. There has to be a reason for doing it.
And
The
the-
same way like, we can do a survey on this, but then what are we gonna do with it? And to do it, just to do it is a waste of our resources. And so what is it we want to know that that we don't already know?
Yeah, because it costs to put this stuff together, time and energy and.
Right, I guess when I ask the question, I just. We ask, are we where we want to be? And are we doing what we want to do? Do you have what you need? And I think, it could just be a matter of, these are our academic goals. Yes, we're where we want to be. And like we said, in 7th grade, we are going to take a deeper dive into that growth and what we're doing there, That's where my question was coming from, about what are our goals and are we where we want to be?
I see, and I can see
I didn't mean
every
to make it
building
too
has
complicated.
a unique need. Whether, and I don't care if it's academic or cultural, whatever, they have their own. So is that what we want to hear is what? Sort of a perspective on what's happening at Heritage versus Arboretum in terms of. What are the key needs here versus the key needs? Is that what we want?
Well. A lot of that, I don't want to be micromanaging.
I guess for, you know, for their, but I would like, I would just wanna know, we set priorities as a school board and goals as a school board. And then is that in line with what the school's priorities and goals are? And if we have a goal or priority about academic excellence, how is that translating into our schools? What does that look like? And what goals do they have to get to that academic excellence? And are we there? Are we where we wanted to be? So I mean, that's where my question was coming from.
So, I mean, that could be answered simply, like, we could collect those and put those together. And if that's the level of information you want, we can do that.
Yeah. That's,
If you're thinking, yeah, you want to hear more from individual schools, what makes them unique, if you want to cycle them in, so you get to kind of, you know, interact with the principals or hear about their school, you know, it depends on your goal. If your goal is what are the goals, we can do that. We can do that today. But if you want something more, that's, I guess, what I was thinking when we had this on the agenda, that maybe you wanted more of a presentation, more interactivity. But if you don't, then that's fine too. It does need to be meaningful. There is a time cost to things. So we just want to, we heard the request, we want to fulfill it.
Yeah.
And we want a clarification on how to fulfill
I I certainly don't want to be wasting anybody's time. I don't want to be feeling like we're micromanaging. I just think it's a data point. When we're looking at all this data, I think that's something that's important to know. So,
it. Yeah, and I agree. And a lot of the schools actually, you know, because you kind of set your goals first. So a lot of them, you know, when the board has a PLC goal, that informs our work. When the board has an SEL goal, that informs our work. So you will see alignment from the board goals, certainly to the school goals.
I tend to listen and talk and think this, and I talk myself out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I talked myself out of organizing another presentation that we can get informally or, yeah, I guess I don't want to make another group that has to come together. That's right.
Well, and the other reality is in 3 months, none of us may be on the committee and they may want something different. And that's a wonderful thing about this, the
Yeah.
system, right? Because we can be talking about this right now, but next year's committee may not want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
And so, to me, I think we can set the groundwork for what we think is important to have. But it may not stay with the next group.
So I'm going to say for this moment in time, for this year, we will provide the copies of the goals for your
Thank you.
review. And then perhaps in April or May, we could talk about whatever the makeup of the committee would like for the goals next year. So they'll probably get them at the beginning of the year, and if they want to do any follow-up.
It's a good idea.
thank you.
Did you get that, Rebecca?
Thank you. I don't want to overcomplicate anything
No.
at all. I just think it's a good
Yes,
point of
You're right.
information to have.
definitely.
No, I think you're right. And when you're just starting out, you want to know all this stuff and where do you learn about it?
Yeah.
But then you begin to realize, well, that's 6 more meetings.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you for that discussion. And that's our last thing on our agenda. So we just need a motion to, do we need to talk about future meetings?
So based on our conversation, I would suggest that we bring the I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I do think let's bring the high school course book into the next meeting, and I can
Yeah.
talk to Brian about who could be good resources to walk you through that and answer questions. And if you haven't really looked at it in some time, that's going to be close to a full meeting right there. I mean, we'll get it to you in advance. It's actually on the website right now, but I mean, but when you look at it, there's obviously what the courses are, but you'll see that there are some other organizational features to the course guidebook that really speak to the high school program besides simply being a catalog of courses.
Is
So I
there a
think that-
printed,
So there's a hard copy there. that's-
yeah, is there a hard copy?
there's gotta
we
be.
could produce a hard copy.
I'd
It
like a hard
is,
copy.
it's not short.
No, I
Um,
know, but I didn't want to print.
We
these
could
other
print them
things.
and just put them in your mailboxes.
Yeah, we
That'd
could
be
definitely do
helpful.
that.
That'd
They'll be
great.
there Monday, but then we'll bring in resources for your next meeting. I think
Good,
that could
good.
be, based on what we've heard around the table
Yeah.
today, I think that could be good.
Do you guys want to schedule that meeting already?
I'm able to schedule it. Have my
What's your
calendar.
And I have this wonderful paper book right here that I can flip to the next one.
That's your technology. Judy's brought her check.
And a pencil that I can erase.
So, do we want to meet, before our next board meeting? Or do we, can
Which
we,
would be the first 2 weeks of February.
so it would be. Next board meeting is the 13th of February, so. The week before, the week of the 6th.
I'm open.
That one's open the last, well, the actual first week is, the first half week is open too, so whatever,
Okay.
what's ever available.
Do we want to do something more in the afternoon? Or can we do it in the morning? I mean, if we're gonna be bringing in,
You're probably going to be looking at members of the high school administrative team and potentially some counselors. I mean, I don't know that we would.
So that'd be
Bring in
like a
content.
4 o'clock.
We could, or we could do it during the, so we could do it during the day. They're not gonna wanna overlay, if we're bringing in admin, they're not gonna want. They can make themselves available in the day, but they're not gonna wanna be available to you during the lunchtime for supervision.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So to me, that would mean either an earlier meeting on a morning or an after school is probably the best.
Well, mornings are good. I mean, then. Then we use our time quickly, wisely.
so like a 7:30 morning,
8:30, do they have to kind of get the school started?
8:30 might be best, so they can be there for the
Yeah,
first bit of student arrival. It's not quite the same as it would be for an elementary, but I think 8:30 would be better than 7:30.
okay,
Okay,
so I can. Do.
Pick a day.
Yeah.
I have no conflicts.
Groundhog Day, the second? Or the next week?
The second will work for me.
Sure. That's Groundhog Day?
Yeah, February 2nd. Don't you celebrate?
Why isn't it the first?
It's never the first.
Because the groundhog says so.
Unless
That's-
my calendar.
Yeah, that works out great.
Wrong.
8:30 on the second.
All right.
I make a
So-
motion to adjourn. Or do-
Second.
Or do we want more than one?
No,
Just one out.
oh, we're adjourned. All in favor?
Now we're adjourned. All right.
Aye.